So I needed an excuse to look up pictures of hot women. So let's talk about the women of urban fantasy and what that means. And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell, a series where I spend way too much time thinking about what makes a story. And I just lied a bit. I never need an excuse to look up hot women on the internet. So to begin today, I'm linking to an article of an interview of two writers who have pretty good idea of what it means to be strong women in urban fantasy. Specifically, the top two authors of urban fantasy, Carrie Vaughn and Kelly Armstrong. The funny part is the article talks about how women are taking over fantasy, but I think they've been there all along. I also just spoke about the three Harrys, and two out of the three of them were written by men, though, so maybe I'm wrong. When I really think back to my first exposure to urban fantasy, I'm not thinking about guys and novels. It took me a little while to put it all together, but there are two TV shows. Now, most people don't call Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie urban fantasy, but hear me out. When we really look at what urban fantasy means, they were really some of the forerunners, maybe the forerunners. At its core, it's a modern world with fantasy elements in it. You know, like an ad agent marrying a witch or a NASA pilot with a magical djinn. Those two were originally competition shows. When ABC found itself with a hit on September 17th, 1964, NBC had to follow suit in September 18th, 1965, almost a year to the day. The two of them started out pretty mild. Well, maybe not by their standards. They wouldn't even let Barbara Eden show her belly button in the first few episodes of I Dream of Jeannie. All these years later, Sookie Stackhouse may have showed a bit more off on HBO. Now, I'm no prude, and I realize that hot women sell visual mediums. Heck, look at the thumbnail for my video. And shows like Mike and Molly are odd ones out. However, you will see as time crawls on, women wear less and less, and we use their bodies for more of the selling point of the visual medium of urban fantasy. The funny part is that when we put them in the books, they sell more to women. When we put them on TV, more men watch. However, as that's gone on, they've also become stronger and stronger. Even my favorite medium, comic books, is famous for what is called stripperific costumes. The Witchblade series is about a woman who's a New York City cop who gets the Witchblade that armors her up. You'd think Iron Man. It thinks swimsuit model. When they adapted it to their own TV show for like 15 minutes on TNT, they did tone that down a bit. So we have a bit of a spectrum. Buffy was sexy, of course, but she wouldn't take any of anyone's crap, or letting anyone else call the shots the way Darren did with Bewitched. Both Buffy and Sam were the lead protagonists and had the power, but Buffy was a little more feminist-friendly. However, we meet Sam on their wedding night, and we meet Buffy in, well, we'll call it a rocky relationship history. The Charmed sisters are known to date and have powers, but with maybe the exception of Leo, maybe, they weren't really tied to a guy in the way the Jeannie was. So, at the end of the day, is it single versus settled down? It's a little bit of both. I don't think the Charmed sisters could have been written in the 1960s, and I don't think Jeannie would have been as easygoing if she was in the modern era. You could say modern stories told sexualized women in general, but to that, I bring up the protagonist of Joan of Arcadia. She's trying to do good. The stories themselves were pretty good, solid C's most of the time, with a couple of B- episodes. Didn't last more than a season or two. Like Elizabeth Montgomery before her, Amber Tamblyn wasn't super sexy or super action, but she brought a charm and power to a supernatural show. I think Bewitched had a bit more fantasy in the urban than most of Joan's stories did. Her stories only really started and ended with a pep talk from God, but Bewitched was about a whole family of magical beings. The more and more I thought about it, there were a couple of levels of spectrum. So I chose two characters that I think exemplify both ends. So, for the next few minutes, I want to compare Sookie Stackhouse and Samantha from Bewitched. So let's put the two side by side and compare some basics. Bewitched is about a witch who marries an ordinary man and vows to lead the life of a typical suburban housewife. On a personal note, I can't say that I would have the stubbornness of Darren when it comes to, hey, my wife can do magic. But, whatever, that's the concept. Bewitched enjoyed great popularity. It was the #2 show in America in its debut season. Not that that means as much as it does today, because there were like 4 channels total back then. And it does hold the record for longest running supernatural-themed sitcom for the 60s and 70s. The show continues today in syndication, as most of those shows from the 60s and 70s did. Now, Bewitched wasn't shy about taking on race issues, drug issues, or even the fact that they had an openly gay uncle. At the end of the day, though, it was still a product of its time. True Blood is based on the Southern Vampire Mystery series by Charlene Harris, detailing the world of vampires and werewolves and other sorts of otherworldly beings. And the main story takes place in Bonton, Louisiana, a completely made-up city. The series centers on the adventures of Sookie Stackhouse, played by Anna Paquin, who's a telepathic waitress with otherworldly qualities. This one, it's a little less clear. Her love life's a mess. She ends up with the werewolf, the 2 of the vampires, a whole bunch of hookups along the way. Her main ability is her telepathy. And I have to say, I understand why people get weirded out. Think about all the things you think about and don't want to say. Now, put it in the hands of someone who's an attractive member of the opposite sex. That's a pretty scary person to be around. This series was from 2008 to 2014, 7 seasons overall, I think about 80 episodes. The first 5 seasons were given a whole bunch of awards, Golden Globe, Emmy, all sorts of things. Later seasons, not so much. True Blood explores several contemporary issues, such as the struggle for equal rights, discrimination and violence against minority and homosexuals. Who can forget those signs? God hates fangs. They deal with drug addiction, faith, control and influence of the media. Actually, the biggest thing I think they do is the quest for identity, trying to figure out who you are in this world. It handles them much more head-on, instead of just making jokes of them in the background, like Bewitched did. All in all, though, both were relatively contemporary to their time. I'm sure that in the years to come, True Blood is going to be seen very much as a product of the early 2000s. As I discussed in my setting video, setting is a time and a place. And so for Bewitched, that would be the address of 1164 Morning Glory Circle, but it's very much still 60s and 70s. Much more 60s, if anything. Most of the scenes take place there, and that's either Paterson, New York, or Westport, Connecticut, depending on which season you're looking at. I always thought it was Connecticut. Maybe that's because that's where I live. Part of it also takes place at the advertising agency McMahon and Tate, which is where the husband Darren works. There are occasionally times where they go to other people's houses, or a park or something like that, but I'd say about 80% of it takes place in that house. Now, the setting is very much important to it because it's a product of its time. They don't travel around a lot. Occasionally they'll go here or there, but realistically, it's a housewife story. It takes place in the house. On the other hand, the Sookie Stackhouse story isn't so much about setting. Yes, it takes place mostly in Bonton, but they do some fair share of traveling to different places in the South, even different places in the world. At one point, they even travel to the fairy realm, although that's short-lived. The main part of their setting, though, is a prejudiced backwater place. That's really what they really are aiming for. They want you to look at it and see old world charm mixed with old style prejudice. My personal favorite setting in there is Fantasia, which is a bar based on the word Fantasia from, like the Disney movie, but it's Fang. It's a bar that I would consider the most stereotypical part. But then again, there's another bar that plays an important part, and that's Merlotte's, which is the more normalized bar. And again, kind of backwater. To be perfectly honest, I think the visual part of this story has nothing to do with its setting. So what are my conclusions? My first conclusion is that Sam and Sookie actually have a lot more in common than on their surface appears. They're both strong women. They both make up their mind on what they want, even though, in Samantha's case, she's choosing to be a normal housewife. She's choosing not to let her powers be what defines her. And maybe that is strength. I know a lot of feminists say that it's not, that choosing to be a housewife is somehow degrading, but it was her choice. It's what she wanted. And she wanted to be with Darren, and she wanted to raise a family, and she did. Sookie, on the other hand, didn't really know what she wanted at the beginning. She did latch on to a guy just because her powers didn't work on him. You think about it, she gained strength with every episode, or every book. And when you look at the two of them, you see maybe urban fantasy hasn't come that far. It's only come as far as allowing us to write women that fall in the whole spectrum. Overall, as an author myself, I do find myself often writing women to be just another person. It often makes me go a little crazy when I hear people ask, how do you write a strong woman? Well, you write them the same way you'd write a strong guy, or anyone else. We're all just people at the end of the day. Next time I touch on this, maybe I'll talk about my new favorite show, Wynonna Earp, or maybe touch on the Charm Sisters, I'm not sure. If you have a preference, you can leave that down in the comments. Now that I've said that, why don't you tell me all the ways I'm wrong down in the comment section, and we can hopefully start a whole discussion about what this tells us. In the meantime, thank you for joining me here as we've explored the women of urban fantasy, specifically Sookie and Samantha. Thank you and good night.